Human geography of Africa. What I want you to look at this pictures up here is how different Africa is diversely. This is a fairly current political map of Africa. All right, history. We've got African empires that started out. During the pre-modern era, Africa had some of the bigger cities and kingdoms in Europe. Especially down here, you can see the various larger cities and kingdoms. They include Mali, Songhai Empire, Ascom, and Zimbabwe. And the empires traded with Europe, China, and the Islamic world. They were considered equals at this time. Your early exploration and your slavery into Africa. Africa was explored and mapped by the Portuguese in the 1400s. Colonization of the Americas created that new market for the slave labor. Slavery had already existed in Africa. Islamic world used African slave labor. Slaves were purchased from Africa from slave traders. They were usually war captives, prisoners, and others. Realize that the slave traders were blacks themselves. Okay, colonization of Africa. Colonies, they were divided up by competing countries of Europe in the 1800s, called the African Scramble. European leaders gathered in Berlin to divide up Africa for colonization and trade for the 1884 Berlin Conference. European countries at this conference came in and really just divided up, said, I want this, you get that, and that's how Africa got divided up. King Leopold II of Belgium convinced most of Europe that common trade was in their best interest. King Leopold took over the Congo area in Belgium, and again, they were just going in for resources. They wanted the resources of Africa. And here is a map of the European colonies in Africa in 1914. So you can see there's very few countries that would have been controlled by African countries. Post-World War II independence. After World War II, Africa slowly gained their independence from Europe between the 1950s and 1970s. Because the national boundaries were created by Europeans, they did not match where people actually lived. African leaders included people like Mobutu Sese Seko, leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo, who ruled as a dictator for decades. One man, one vote, one time was common. Okay, and this is a map, African independence from 1914 to present, showing when the various countries got their independence. As you can see, a good chunk of them got them in late 1950s to the 1960s. Modern Africa. Fewer dictators these days, but you still have lots of problems. And this is due to the colonization and slavery. You got 900 million people in 57 countries. Over 1,000 different languages are spoken in Africa. And Africa is rich in resources, but it's still the poorest part of the world due to your diseases. You've got malaria and AIDS and HIV, famine and starvation. You're, again, the effects of the colonialism and slavery, warfare and terrorism, and unstable and corrupt governments, and difficulty of climate and terrain. They also have a very poor infrastructure. Your regions and some of the issues of Africa. Here's your regions: North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, and South Africa. West Africa. You have 3 empires in the regions is Ghana, Mali, and the Songhai, and is supported by gold and salt exports. Salt way back was more important than gold. Cultural hearth. Parts of West Africa culture have spread through the world due to slavery. And many one commodities countries here. In other words, they're growing one crop, cash crops. an extremely diverse population, thousands of languages and ethnic groups. Okay, here are some of your ethnic groups of Nigeria. As you can see, there's a bunch of different ones. Bunch of different ethnic groups. And then your linguistic groups have been in Nigeria and Cameroon. As you can see, you've got a bunch of different languages being spoken in this area. All right in here. This is all different languages, and as you can see, there's a bunch of them. East Africa, mainly rural and agricultural. Regions depend heavily on tourism in the Serengeti and Kilimanjaro. It's a crossroads for many trade routes with the Middle East, India, and Asia. And they have cash crops such as coffee, tea, and sugar. And there is a persistent problem with piracy, warfare, and famine in the Horn of Africa. Your instability in the Horn of Africa, you've got Sudan, which had a civil war in a place called Darfur, and this is where the Arabs in the north fought the blacks in the south. Northern side tried to ethnically cleanse the south. We've talked about ethnically cleansing a couple of times now. War has ended by an agreement to split Sudan into two countries. Somalia, they have no government. It's ruled by the warlords, and these are your leaders who control armies and territories by force. Some are Islamic fundamentalists who want to impose Sahari on Somalia. And many Somali fishermen have turned to piracy to support themselves or to help warlords attacking ships in the Indian Ocean. They'll take out the small boats and raid freighters, yachts, and cruise ships. As you can see in this map right here, this is Somalia, and this is as far out as these guys go out for attacking in the piracy. So they're not just sticking just into the Somalia area. Alright, Central Africa. It's a region centered on the Congo River Basin, originally home to the Bantu people who migrated across Africa and spread their culture. They lived in stateless societies before colonization. The region was colonized by France and Belgium. King Leopold II of Belgium ran the Congo as his private property, destroying much of it. Again, he was coming in after the resources. After independence, the region fell into civil war. Post-colonial Central Africa has not recovered. It's still in chaos with the collapse of economies and a terrible war that has killed millions. They're still fighting. Okay, conflict diamonds, blood diamonds. This is money from diamonds that are used to fund wars, buy weapons, and hire the mercenaries. Southern, Central, and West Africa, especially in Sierra Leone, Congo, and Angola, is where this is occurring. And it forces in the diamond areas may use slave labor to get more diamonds more quickly. Diamonds are regulated by Kimberley process since 2003. Okay, your Rwanda genocide. Rwanda was split between minority Tutsi and majority Hutu. Constant political conflict over power sharing and frequent civil war were fought between these two groups. In 1994, a Hutu president was assassinated, triggering a massacre of the Tutsis by the Hutu militias, mostly armed with axes and machetes. The genocide was pre-planned. Between 500,000 and 1 million people were murdered in April of 1994. Europe and U.S. largely stood by and did nothing. We didn't get involved. Okay, Southern Africa. It's got a vast amounts of natural resources, gold, diamonds, metals, uranium, and others. South Africa was once under apartheid. Whites ruled blacks as second-class citizens. That ended in 1994 due in part to Nelson Mandela. And the region faces huge problems with AIDS and HIV. 25% infection rate or higher of the population here. Okay, South Africa in the anti-apartheid struggle from 1948 to 1990, the apartheid system separated whites and blacks. This was worse than what happened in the U.S. with our civil rights. Political power was held by the whites, and that was only 5% of the population. Homelands. Blacks pushed into small areas and then made independent. South Africa was isolated from the international community because of the apartheid. The international community didn't have a whole lot to do with South Africa. And the resistance was led by Nelson Mandela and the ANC despite imprisonment from 1962 to 1990. And this is a map of the apartheid where you can see your various pockets of forced removals and where they were pushed into.